Okay, let's build off our last lesson and talk about percents, fractions, and decimals. A learning target for this lesson is students will be able to convert between percents, fractions, and decimals. So the other day we talked about fractions and decimals. Today we're going to add percents into the mix. This next statement is extremely important. Okay, what is a percent? A percent is a rate out of 100. Okay, so we're talking about a rates comparing the numerator to the denominator. A percent is when you compare a number out of 100. That's what a percent is. So when you take your quiz scores and all that and you want to know what percent you get, you're basically taking the score I gave you and then comparing it to out of 100. Okay, so let's go over some examples. If you need to pause to write that down, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm moving on. Okay, example 1, representing percents, fractions, and decimals. So I have two grids here. This first grid is a 10 by 10 grid. If you count it, it's 10 across by 10 down, which means there's 100 squares. In the second grid, I have a 1 by 5, okay, which I have one column by 5 rows, which is going to be, I have 5 squares, or 5 sections, because they're not really squares. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that square, and what does each section represent? So when I give you this grid, I want you to be able to tell me what percent that is out of, what's the fraction of each section, and what each decimal represents. Well, since there's 100 squares, okay, this represents each section, okay, what each section, not the whole thing. Each whole square, the large square, always represents 100%. So if I want to look at this and I only have 1 out of 100 of them, then that's going to represent 1%. I have 100 of them. That means each square is going to represent 1%. 1 times 100 is 100%. Okay? As a fraction, that is going to be 1 over 100. Each section represents 1 out of the 100 total. The amount each section has over the total amount of sections. Alright, and then the decimal of each one, well, that means that each decimal is going to represent 0.01 or 1/100th. Notice that the 1/100th is 1.01. That's 1/100th, if you say that correctly. And that's going to be what each section represents. So it's important that when you look at a grid that you know what each section represents as far as the total. The total of the grid is 100%. Okay? In B, I have 5 sections. So each section is going to represent 20%. Okay? 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Those are my 5 sections, so each section represents 20%. What is that as a fraction? Well, the one section out of 5 total. So that is going to be the fraction that each represents. Okay? And then what is that as a decimal? Well, that is going to be 0.2 or 2 tenths, which would convert to 20 hundredths, which makes my percent out of 100. Okay, so that is what you'll need to do, is be able to look at a grid and understand what each section represents. That way, if I were to start shading in, you would know how to work from there. Okay, and so you have to know what each understands. Again, a percent is a rate out of 100, so it has a denominator of 100. Okay, if I don't give you a 10 by 10 grid, it's easy, but if I don't, you got to do a little bit more work. Okay, if you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll be moving on to the next part. All right, in example 2, we're going to model percents, fractions, and decimals. We're going to talk about modeling now. So I want you to take this example here, A. It's a 10 by 10 grid, which means that there's 100 squares. And I want you to write the percent, the fraction, and the decimal for this. Okay. So first thing I'm going to do is 10 by 10. So I'm going to count them up. I have 10 in the first row, plus 3 in the second row is going to give me a total of 13. So I have 13 shaded in. As a percent, since there's 100 squares, okay, that's going to be 13%. Each square represents 1%. I have 13 of them, so that's 13%. As a fraction, that is going to be 13 over 100. I have 13 shaded in. There's 100 squares, so that's going to be 13 over 100. And as a decimal, since each percent equals 0.01, or each section equals 0.01, I have 13 of them, That's going to be 0.13. Okay? I want you to start to look at the relationship between our percent and our fraction. Notice that the 13% was 0.13. Okay, and then 0.13 was 13%. I want you to start to pay attention to the relationship of the decimal point when we're working with those. Okay, and remember, percents are out of 100. Okay, if you need to pause, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm moving on. Okay, in the next section, I want you to draw the model for the percent, fraction, or decimal here. So we're going to draw the model for this one. So 0.2. So I'm going to make my 10 by 10 grid. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then the same going down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sections. So I have my 10 by 10 grid. Okay, 0.2. So that's 2 tenths or 20 hundredths. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this one is I am going to shade in 20. Again, this represents 20% or 2 tenths, which equals 20 hundredths. Okay, so I'm going to shade in 20 of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And that's going to be my answer. Now, nothing said that I had to shade those 20. I can shade any 20 on there. They don't have to, I can make a design if I wanted, but we're going to try to keep things simple. So you're going to have them in groups of 10. So count by groups of 10. That'll speed up your work. Okay? Again, look at the relationship between my percent and my decimal. Okay, we'll talk about that in the next part. Okay, moving on now. Okay, now, in my last section, we're going to convert between percents, fractions, and decimals. Okay, so the first one I gave you a percent, so I want you to give it to me as a fraction and a decimal. So 10% as a fraction is going to be 10 over 100. It's always percent out of 100. So as a fraction, it's going to be that number over 100. So that's 10 over 100. Okay, which then I can simplify, divide them both by 10, and I'm going to get 1/10. So that's my fraction. Now, as a decimal, 10% is really easy. Okay, look, it's 1/10, so we can use our fraction to help us. But all you have to do is to go from a percent to a decimal. You move your decimal point. Okay, move your decimal point 2 places to the left. Okay, so I'm going to take 10% and I'm going to move it 2 to the left. Decimal point is going to go right there. So my decimal is 0.10 or just 0.1. Okay, so that's all you have to do for that is just move your decimal point because you're dividing by 100. 2 spots because 100 is moving your decimal point to over 2 places. Okay, and in example B, I have 1 over 3. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to convert that to a decimal. That's what I'm going to do first. So I'm going to divide. Okay, so 3 goes into 1 0 times. That becomes 10. Move my decimal point. That goes in 3. It's 9. Subtract. I get the 1. Bring the 0 down. 10, 3, 9. I get the 1. Okay, I got the pattern. So this is going to equal 0.3 repeating. So that's what it is as a decimal. So I got my decimal. Now I'm going to write it as a percent. Well, I'm going to do the opposite up above. So if I go from a decimal to a percent, you're going to move decimal point 2 places to the right. So you can go the opposite direction because again it's out of 100. So all I'm going to do for this one is take 0.3 repeating. Remember 0.3 repeating, guys, is a bunch of 3's after it. So when I move my decimal point over 2, 1, 2, my final answer is going to be 33.3 repeating. Okay, so you have to remember that when it's repeating, there are 3's after there. And that's going to be my percent, so I want to put a percent sign on that. And there are my decimals and fractions for each. And that is how you convert them between the two. Okay, Alright, if you need to watch any part of the video, go ahead. Otherwise, we will see you in class tomorrow.